Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into gangs.
Ooh.
You know, right? A pretty intense topic, but
Yeah.
we're going to be going beyond those headlines and those typical stereotypes that
Yeah.
we always seem to hear about gangs.
Right.
And to get to the bottom of this, we've got a fascinating mix of sources today. We've got some expert commentary.
Of course.
We've got some firsthand accounts from a former gang member.
Wow.
We've even got a journalist who had an interaction with a serial rapist who was gang affiliated as a youth.
Oh, my goodness.
And then we've also got some investigative journalism about gang activity and particularly how it plays out on social media.
Fascinating.
I think you'll be surprised by what we uncover today about the psychology of gangs and what actually works to combat this issue. So by the end of this deep dive, you'll be able to walk into that meeting or that presentation not only sounding informed, but also with some truly thought-provoking insights to share.
It's true. This deep dive is going to equip you with a perspective that goes far beyond those usual cliches that we hear all the time.
Absolutely. All right, well, let's just jump right into it. So get this. 9 out of 10 people have actually committed a crime at some point in their lives.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's according to a TEDx talk that we'll be looking at.
Okay.
So it's not just some made-up statistic.
Yeah. That's a powerful way to start, isn't it? It really makes you question, your assumptions about who is and isn't a criminal.
It really does. And it actually leads perfectly into this Dr. Phil episode that we have, where there's a former gang member named Joseph who talks about his experiences. So by the age of 25, he'd been arrested at 9,
Oh, my God.
shot 4 times, and has spent 13 years incarcerated.
Wow.
But on that same show, there's a 15-year-old who is completely romanticizing gang life. And it's just a striking contrast between these two.
Yeah, and what's fascinating is that Joseph actually addresses the 15-year-old directly with this emotional plea, and he tells him, there's nothing cool about taking somebody's life.
It's powerful.
So we see here that there's this deeper psychological need that gangs often fulfill this yearning for belonging and purpose, which can be especially strong, in a 15-year-old.
Right, and it really highlights how the perception of gangs can be so different from the reality.
Absolutely.
And it makes you think about why someone would even join in the first place.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, poverty often comes to mind.
Of course.
But is that really the only factor?
Well, that TEDx Athens talk about what actually motivates crime is a great resource here.
Oh, okay.
It turns out that crime can drop significantly even without addressing poverty directly.
Really?
Yeah. And the speaker gives this great example of car theft. Remember how those rates plummeted a while back?
Yeah, I remember hearing about that. But I just assumed it was because people were doing better economically.
Well, it wasn't. It was because newer cars became much harder to steal.
Oh.
Crime often thrives on opportunity. Oh, interesting.
And in fact, studies show that if you block one type of crime, often that can create a halo effect.
Okay.
Reducing other crimes in the vicinity.
So it's more about opportunity and circumstance than some inherent, criminal tendency.
Right.
Wow, this is already changing the way I think about gangs.
Yeah.
Making me realize it's not as simple as good guys and bad guys.
Absolutely.
Okay, but we still haven't answered that question.
Right.
Why join a gang if it's not just about poverty?
Right.
Well, the infographic show video that we have lists a whole bunch of reasons.
Okay.
Belonging, finding purpose, boredom, oppression, protection.
Right.
It even mentions the thrill of being part of something bigger than themselves.
And that ties directly back to that Dr. Phil episode and that 15-year-old kid who was glorifying gangs.
Yeah.
He's clearly seeking status and identity.
Yeah.
And gangs provide that through, their initiation rituals, their symbols, even their clothing.
And it all contributes to a very strong group identity, which, let's be honest, we all crave to some extent.
Right. So they're tapping into this fundamental human need for belonging, but in a very distorted way.
Yes.
Speaking of distorted, let's talk about how social media is playing into all of this.
Okay.
That VCE video we have on gangs and social media is pretty eye-opening.
I bet.
It's like the digital world has become an extension of their territory.
It's true. They're using social media for everything: recruitment, intimidation, settling scores.
Really?
Yeah. The lines between the online world and the real world are becoming more and more blurred.
It's crazy.
Remember that example of the Trinitarios gang in New York City?
No.
So their online feuds were leading to real-life violence.
Oh, wow.
And it even resulted in the tragic death of a 15-year-old boy who was just mistaken for a gang member.
That's horrifying.
It is. And you know what's scary is it creates this feedback loop.
Yeah.
Where online posts about violence can actually lead to more violence.
Oh, wow. So they're almost like competing for notoriety.
Exactly. And that online validation plays directly into the need for status within the gang.
Yeah.
So it's a really potent mix.
Yeah, especially for young people who are already vulnerable to peer pressure and that desire for acceptance.
Right.
Okay, so we've got this external pressure of social media, but what about the internal dynamics within a gang?
Okay.
The Crim Psychologiopia video we have gets pretty dark here.
Okay.
Talking about how gang leaders use coercion, fear, and manipulation to control members.
That's disturbing.
Yeah, it's almost like a textbook example of a cycle of abuse.
It is, and it's a disturbing parallel, and it's worth unpacking a bit.
Okay.
A cycle of abuse essentially describes how patterns of violence and control are often repeated. And often someone who has been abused may in turn become the abuser.
Oh, wow.
It's a tragic cycle that's unfortunately all too common in these environments.
Right. And I can see the connection there that journalist Amy Hurdy in her TEDx talk describes encountering a serial rapist who was gang affiliated in his youth.
Right.
And he had been abused as a child, and that trauma became a factor in his own acts of violence.
It's heartbreaking.
It is. And it's a reminder that this cycle of violence isn't just limited to the criminal justice system.
Right.
It can permeate various aspects of society, even impacting, our understanding of seemingly unrelated issues like sexual assault.
Absolutely.
That's a lot to take in.
It is.
And it makes me think about that former gang member on Fight Science.
Okay.
Who said that he felt pressured to participate in crimes because he was afraid of his fellow gang members.
Right.
So it wasn't just about loyalty. It was about survival.
You've hit on a crucial point. Fear becomes a very powerful tool for control within a gang.
Right.
It's not just about camaraderie or shared goals.
Right.
It's about navigating a hierarchy.
Okay.
Where disobedience can have very dire consequences.
So we've established that poverty isn't the sole driver, that there's this complex interplay of psychological needs, social pressures, and even this warped sense of belonging.
Yes.
The big question is, what do we do about it?
Right.
Is prison the only answer?
Well, that's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
The Crim Psychologiopia video and Amy Hurdy's TEDx talk both emphasize the importance of rehabilitation and addressing those underlying causes.
So it's not just about punishing the behavior.
Right.
It's about understanding why it's happening in the first place and trying to break the cycle.
Absolutely. And Amy Hurdy made this really powerful point in her talk.
Yeah.
She said we should focus on don't rape rather than just don't get raped.
Wow.
It's about addressing the root causes of violence and not just focusing on the victims.
And that's a powerful analogy, and it applies to gangs as well, right?
Absolutely.
Programs that offer counseling, mentorship, job training, education, and positive role models. Yeah. Those are crucial elements in breaking the cycle.
Yeah. And if we look back at Joseph's story, the former gang member who's now dedicated to helping others avoid the path he took, we see that change is possible with the right support.
It's like he's living proof that there's life beyond the game.
Absolutely.
And that his transformation highlights the importance of providing that sense of hope.
Yeah.
And showing that there are alternative paths to belonging and purpose.
Right.
It's not just about locking people up.
Right.
It's about giving them the tools and the support they need to build a new life for themselves.
And that's where we need to shift our thinking. Instead of just viewing these individuals solely as criminals, that we need to see them as people who've made bad choices, but who, with the right interventions, can still turn their lives around.
It's about offering them a chance at redemption.
Exactly.
It's a powerful idea, this notion of redemption.
Yeah.
But how do we get from that point of fear and coercion within the gang to a place where someone feels empowered to change their life?
It's a complex process for sure, and I think understanding the power dynamics within a gang is a good place to start.
Okay.
You know, that Crim Psychologiopia video pointed out how those hierarchies often mirror the social structures we see in the larger society.
So it's not just this random chaos, like there's actually a system in place.
Absolutely. There's a very deliberate structure. You've got leaders at the top, you've got lieutenants, foot soldiers, and everybody is striving for respect and recognition within that system. Unfortunately, that often means engaging in increasingly risky or violent acts to prove their worth.
It's like a distorted version of ambition almost, like a twisted corporate ladder where climbing to the top means putting yourself and others in danger.
That's a great analogy, and the desire for power and status within that structure can be a huge factor in keeping people trapped in that cycle of violence.
It's making me realize that breaking free from a gang isn't just about escaping a physical place. It's about escaping a mindset.
Right.
Like a whole system of beliefs and values that's been ingrained in you.
Exactly. And that's why simply locking people up isn't enough.
Yeah.
We need to offer them alternative paths, a chance to rewrite their narrative, so to speak.
Okay.
Remember Joseph?
Yeah.
He's a shining example of how someone can break free and find a new purpose.
He's like a walking, talking success story showing that there's life beyond the gang.
Absolutely.
But how do we create more Josephs?
Right.
How do we help others find that same path to redemption?
It starts with recognizing that these individuals, despite their past actions, are still human beings capable of change.
Yeah.
Remember what Amy Hurdy said in her TEDx talk about encountering that serial rapist?
Yeah.
She emphasized the importance of compassion and understanding, even for those who have committed terrible acts.
It's about looking beyond the label of monster and recognizing the potential for transformation.
Right.
It's a challenging concept. I mean, especially when we're talking about people who have caused harm.
Of course.
But if we truly want to break the cycle of violence, we have to believe that change is possible.
Absolutely. And that's where intervention comes in.
Okay.
It's about reaching out to at-risk youth before they become deeply entrenched in gang life, before they've internalized those harmful values and behaviors.
Right.
It's about addressing those risk factors that we talked about earlier: poverty, lack of education, exposure to violence, and providing positive alternatives.
So things like after-school programs, mentorship opportunities, community centers, even just having a positive adult role model in their life, all those things can make a difference.
Exactly. Remember that infographics show video?
Yeah.
It mentioned boredom and the need for excitement as factors that can lead someone to join a gang.
It makes sense if you're bored and feel like you have no options. I mean, the allure of a gang with its sense of community and adventure can be pretty powerful, especially for a young person who's searching for their place in the world.
And that's why those positive role models are so important.
Yeah.
They can show these young people that there are other ways
to
find purpose and belonging, ways that don't involve violence and crime.
Right.
It's about offering them a different vision of the future.
It's about planting that seed of hope, showing them that a better path is possible.
Yes.
But what about the role of law enforcement in all of this?
Right.
I mean, these are still criminals we're talking about, right?
Of course, law enforcement plays a vital role in keeping communities safe and holding those who commit crimes accountable.
Right.
But it's not just about arrests and punishment.
Okay.
It's also about working with communities to build trust and address the underlying issues that contribute to gang violence in the first place.
So community policing initiatives, working with schools and community organizations, that kind of thing.
Exactly. It's about building bridges, fostering dialogue, creating a sense of partnership between law enforcement and the communities they serve.
It's about shifting the dynamic from an us versus them mentality to a collaborative approach.
Yes.
Where everyone is working together to create a safer environment.
That's a great way to put it. And when law enforcement is seen as part of the solution, rather than just a force of punishment, it opens up opportunities for real change.
So we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
We've talked about the psychological factors that draw people into gangs, the social and economic conditions that make them fertile recruiting grounds, the impact of social media, the importance of intervention and rehabilitation, and the evolving role of law enforcement.
And we've seen how all of these factors are interconnected.
Yeah.
It's a complex issue, but that doesn't mean it's insurmountable.
Right.
By understanding the nuances, we can start to unravel those threads and create more effective strategies for prevention and intervention.
We've talked about the systemic level, but what about the individual level?
Okay.
What can we as individuals do to make a difference?
Well, first and foremost, it's about education and awareness. The more we understand about these issues, the better equipped we are to advocate for meaningful solutions and support those programs and organizations that are making a difference.
So things like volunteering at a local youth center, donating to organizations that work with at-risk youth.
Yes.
Even just speaking out against gang violence and supporting those who are working to combat it.
Exactly. And it's also about challenging our own assumptions and biases.
Right.
Remember that statistic from the TEDx talk, 9 out of 10 people have committed a crime at some point in their lives.
Yeah.
That should make us pause and question those easy labels of criminal and non-criminal.
It's about recognizing the shared humanity in all of us.
Yes.
Regardless of our past mistakes.
Precisely. And it's about remembering that change is possible. People can and do turn their lives around, even those who've been deeply involved in gangs.
Right.
But they need support, they need opportunities, and they need to believe that a different future is within their reach.
It's a powerful reminder that even in the darkest of circumstances, there's always a glimmer of hope.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked about the need for compassion, understanding, and a belief in the possibility of change. But there's one more point I want to bring up, something that Amy Hurdy mentioned in her TEDx talk.
Okay.
So she talked about how our society often seems to care more about certain types of victims than others.
Right.
She specifically mentioned how the DNA evidence in Margaret's case, the woman attacked by Brent's, sat on a shelf for 2 months.
Wow.
But when Brent's attacked victims in a wealthier neighborhood, that DNA was processed within hours. It's a disturbing disparity.
It is. It highlights a sobering reality that justice isn't always blind. Our perceptions of who is worthy of protection and swift action are often influenced by factors like socioeconomic status, race, even gender. It's a systemic issue that we can't ignore.
It makes you wonder how many cases are mishandled or delayed simply because of the victim's background.
Right.
It's a heartbreaking thought. And to connect that back to our discussion about gangs, it makes you think about the communities where these gangs often thrive. Communities that are already marginalized and underserved.
That's a crucial point. Gangs often emerge in areas where resources or opportunities are limited, and the justice system itself may seem distant or even hostile.
Right.
And when those same communities are also the ones that are neglected or overlooked by law enforcement, it creates a vicious cycle.
It's like a perfect storm for breeding despair and pushing vulnerable individuals toward gangs.
It's a stark reminder that addressing gang violence isn't just about tackling the gangs themselves. It's about addressing the underlying social and economic inequalities that create the conditions for them to flourish in the first place.
So it's about creating a more equitable society where everyone feels seen, heard, and protected.
It's about investing in those communities, providing resources, opportunities, and most importantly, hope.
Yeah.
Because when people feel hopeful about their future, they're less likely to turn to gangs or other forms of violence as a way to cope with their circumstances.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
We started by questioning our assumptions about crime and who commits it, then delved into the psychology of gangs, explored the influence of social media, and examined the complex roles of poverty, opportunity, and even the justice system itself.
And through it all, we've seen how these issues are all intricately connected.
Yeah.
And hopefully you've gained a much deeper understanding of gangs moving beyond those simplistic stereotypes and recognizing the individuals caught within this web of complex forces.
I know. This deep dive has definitely changed the way I think about this issue.
Yeah.
I feel much more informed and prepared to talk about it in a way that goes beyond the surface. And that was our goal, right? To equip you, our listener, with the knowledge and insights to have a more nuanced and impactful conversation about gangs.
Exactly. And remember, it's not just about presenting information.
Right.
It's about using that knowledge to spark a dialogue, challenge assumptions, and advocate for real change.
We started this deep dive wanting to go beyond the headlines to understand the why behind the what.
Right.
And I think we've achieved that. We've seen that gangs are more than just groups of criminals. They're symptoms of deeper societal issues.
Absolutely.
And that those who join gangs are often individuals searching for belonging, purpose, and a way out of difficult circumstances.
And we've seen that there's hope.
Yeah.
There are individuals and organizations working tirelessly to break those cycles of violence and offer a different path.
Yeah.
There are people like Joseph who prove that change is possible.
That's an important message to hold on to. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder.
Okay.
Amy Hurdy said something that really stuck with me. Monsters are made, not born. How can we as a society intervene earlier and more effectively to prevent those monsters from emerging in the first place?
Right.
It's a question that applies not just to gang violence, but to all forms of violence and injustice in our world.
It's a question worth wrestling with, and I encourage you to explore some of the sources we've discussed in more depth.
Yeah.
There's a wealth of information and perspectives out there that we couldn't possibly cover in this deep dive.
Right.
The more we learn, the more empowered we become to create a better future for everyone.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a journey, but an important one.
It has been.
Until next time, keep seeking knowledge, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.